you can be the first to see it. I'm a commissioner for an international tribunal, which is treaty mandated into human trafficking and child sex exploitation.
Welcome to The Last American Vagabond. Today's show is brought to you by Noble Gold, an organization that has taken the initiative to make sure that The Last American Vagabond can continue bringing you the truth that is so desperately needed. Joining me once again today is returning guest, former Marine and CIA officer, Robert David Steele. Welcome to the show, Robert.
Thank you.
So we've all seen the absurd official explanation of the wrong buttons being pushed and shift change mistakes in the recent false missile alert in Hawaii. But as I understand, you have three different sources that lead you to believe that this was there was in fact a real missile en route to Hawaii and that it was ultimately intercepted. Why don't you go ahead and elaborate for me on what you know, and then we'll get into more of the details behind it.
I'd be happy to, and I've got 5 sources now. Let's start with the fact that there's no button. The Hawaii Emergency Alert System, as it was explained to me by someone who has worked with that system, has 5 different fail-safe procedures before it ever issues an alert. And the last one is just like a nuclear missile silo. 2 keys, 8 feet apart, 2 different individuals have to positively turn those keys in order to do this massive alert that is obviously very serious business. You're telling the entire population of Hawaii they're about to get nuked. This is not something you have a stupid button to push, okay? So either the governor is being misled and doesn't know what is in his own emergency system, or he's lying to us. So that's your first indicator right there. The second one is I have a source who has cited a tourist boat that saw the missile hit the water. And this was in fact covered on Channel 2 in Hawaii and then mysteriously scrubbed from its archives, okay? I have another source that says that the Pacific Command issued a separate missile alert. And then I have another source that says that there is a strong suspicion that this was an Israeli nuclear submarine. And finally, there is a wonderful guy talking about how the Clintons just happened to be on Hawaii during this event. And could it be that they really were looking for the best possible alibi? And this guy, Lieutenant Colonel Potter, has done a good job of showing how if the missile had hit the northernmost island in Hawaii, that would have been 450 miles of separation from Oahu. And the prevailing winds are running south to north. So it's all, I think from my point of view, there was a missile. It was intercepted. The governor is lying to us, and we cannot trust the U.S. government.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that most people these days are beginning to kind of realize that fact. And it's interesting because I should point out that I'm sure you've talked about, and I've said in my article, that this kind of thing has never happened before. These, like you said, these fail-safes are in place for a reason. And we've never seen this kind of mistake happen, which is interesting. And some really well-respected independent media journalists, such as James Corbett, have theorized that this is exactly what happened. So I find it very interesting that we're hearing actual source material that backs up the idea of it being an actual missile. So
there is the cyber angle. I mean, not only did we also have a false alarm in Japan, but we just had a nuclear reactor in the Carolinas have a false alarm. I'm the guy who wrote the original warning letter to the White House in 1994. That's the same year in which I was the opening speaker at Hackers on Planet Earth. CIA created the artificial intelligence staff in the Office of Information Technology around me. Most people don't know this about me. I'm not a coder. I'm more of a mega architect and the ultimate pissed off end user. But the reality is a lot of these systems are very vulnerable to hacking and inducing false alarms because the systems, even though they have 2 keys, there's a place where the code meets for those 2 keys that could in fact be hacked. My bottom line is we don't know what happened, but I'm pretty sure the government is lying to us.
Well, so in your opinion, then, based on the sources that you've had, what do you think? Do you think that this was a missile, or do you think this was a hack?
I think this was a missile. Um, I would remind people that the Israelis attacked the USS Liberty, and the US government covered it up. There is no atrocity the Israeli government will not commit to further its ends. And right now, the Israelis are trying very hard, together with the cabal, Goldman Sachs and all these people, they're trying very hard to start a war with North Korea and a war in the Middle East with US troops on the ground. So my bottom line is I do believe there was a missile. I believe it was fired by Israel without any proof. And I believe it was intercepted by forces loyal to the United States of America, and that's a good thing.
Yeah, and it's also important to note that the USS Liberty story, that's a verified historical fact. Many people don't know that. That's very real. Well, so
Yes.
can you elaborate for me on the source that can back up the seeing the missile with the tour boats in Japan? Is there any more you can
No,
give
no,
us?
not in Japan, in Hawaii.
I'm sorry, I misspoke.
In
In
Hawaii.
Hawaii.
No, I cannot. I mean, basically, look, one of the cool things about being me is that I'm a magnet for good people. I'm also a magnet for lunatics, and I have to screen those out. But the people that got in touch with me from Hawaii are prior donors to #OnRig. One of them has donated $2,000. These are people that are serious, wealthy, loyal citizens, and I have every reason to believe them. I've also heard from citizens in Hawaii who are not prior donors who have noticed my post and said, hey, we love that you're doing this because this really smells. We here in Hawaii don't believe our own governor.
Yeah, it's interesting. I actually lived in Hawaii for a little under 2 years. Many people don't know that, and I've reached out to many of the people that I'm familiar with there, and they have very similar skepticism. Like they're willing to openly say that they do not believe what they're being told. Doesn't mean that they think there was a missile, but again, this is the interesting line of thought that I have is understanding the proof behind why we would think this. So you say in your article that you believe that this was a deep state attack. So do you think this was a false flag effort or an outright attack that was covered up?
Well, you can trisect this in three different areas. I mean, area number one is what happened with the false alarm. What happened with the alarm? Okay, I think we're not being told the truth there. Area number two was a missile fired? And if it was fired, was it a nuclear missile? Or was it kind of a fake missile? Non-warhead, unconventional warhead intended to hit the ocean, but intended to create the false fear of an attack by North Korea. I'd say what we know with certainty is that it was not an attack by North Korea. There was no North Korean submarine, no North Korean nuclear missile. This is what Herbert McMaster, an out-and-out traitor, has been trying to press forward. And God bless the intelligence community, because I actually love the intelligence community, although I want to cut their budget by 70% and get them in touch with reality. But the intelligence community, to its credit, has told Trump that the North Korean leader is a rational person and his acquisition of nuclear weapons is totally defensive. And I give Donald Trump a lot of credit for getting the North Koreans and the South Koreans to talk. I'm very excited by the North Koreans and the South Koreans marching together in the Olympics. That is the first step toward unification. And everybody knows that. This is not something the North Koreans would have agreed to do lightly. Marching together in the Olympics is the beginning of the unification of Korea, just like we've seen the unification of Germany. So on balance, I give Trump credit for pushing that envelope with North Korea, and I give him credit for not being deceived by Herbert McMaster and John McCain and John Brennan, who faked the sarin gas attack with money from Israel and Saudi Arabia. So Trump is an enigma right now. I'm really not sure where his head is at. He's taking some real hits with Stormy Daniels, and now Wolf is outing the fact that Trump wanted a lock on his door to sleep with somebody in the White House, not his wife. So Trump's taking a lot of hits. But just like the Monica Lewinsky blowjob, that does not reduce his effectiveness as president in any significant manner. He's making, in fact, I just did an interview yesterday with Denise Wilbanks, who's an Indigo, and we talked about how Trump is just enough, just-in-time knowledge president. He's not one of these frauds that pretends to know stuff. He knows how to get exactly the right information and then act on it. He knows how to connect dots. He's a nonlinear thinker. He's an enigma. He's got all these big warts, and then he's got all these big pluses. And I'm waiting to see what happens. And my bottom line on Trump is, even if he self-destructs tomorrow, he's opened the door for a new form of democracy going into 2018 and 2020.
Now, you know that you and I share a slightly different perspective on Donald Trump from our past discussions.
I'm okay
as
with
always,
that.
I'm very hopeful that the positive end was what we will see. But I actually disagree on the fact that him or the Trump administration was involved with the talks with South Korea. I actually see news breaking today that they're actually outright telling them not to carry out any kind of peace negotiations, specifically because the U.S. wasn't involved with it. So for me, that kind of stands out as a fact that that's kind of not what they want to see carry out. So it kind of I don't know. It makes me feel negative.
I'm with you. Let me say that I've written a very widely quoted article or post on how there are 7 CIAs. There are actually 7 or 8 U.S. governments. When I was overseas, the leader of the country was getting 7 different foreign policy pronouncements. The Pentagon was telling them one thing, the CIA was telling them another, the State Department was telling them another, the White House was telling them another, Wall Street was telling them another. Okay, the United States does not have a grand strategy. The United States does not have a foreign policy. George Shultz is famous for telling Congress that nothing in the U.S. government is ever settled. It's all renegotiated and winged every single day. So the people who are complaining about the Koreans talking are probably not the same people that Donald Trump is talking to, which is himself. Okay, the U.S. government is a chaotic mess, and so from where I sit, bottom line here is, if Donald Trump self-destructs, 2020 is going to be a wet dream for the Green and Libertarian parties and the independents, because it is going to be alleged pedophile Mike Pence against alleged pedophile Joe Biden. I can thread that needle.
Yeah, what a terrifying prospect. But so we can dive into some more other current events and stuff with that in a minute. But I'd like to get back to the missile attack and the potential false flag. The other questions I had was, so we clearly both agree that I don't think that that North Korea was involved in this in any way. I think that's kind of the implication. But do you feel, or have you been told by one of your sources that there was a foreign nation involved? You mentioned Israel, right?
It's a good question. No, Israel is purely speculative. Israel has a couple of Dolphin-class submarines, and one of the things that we're finding is that the U.S. Navy is about 20 years behind in anti-submarine warfare. Chinese submarines with German diesel engines are popping up behind U.S. carriers with entire battle groups around them. I mean, the U.S. Navy cannot win a war today. The U.S. military cannot win a war today. We're this massive, expensive paper tiger that's 50% waste and 90% profit for the banks. I'm ashamed of our U.S. military. It's not being trained, equipped, and organized to actually do what it's supposed to do, which is defend the United States of America. And what it actually is a cesspool where the American taxpayer throws money and the military-industrial complex takes that money and laughs. Okay, so we need to fix all of that. It's entirely possible that it was a rogue element of the U.S. government. Obama relieved some people, including James Mattis, the current Secretary of Defense, because there was a plot by a U.S. Navy admiral to bring the old USS Vincennes into the Gulf of Hormuz and do a false flag in which an alleged Iranian missile took out that old destroyer. And Obama and the counterintelligence people got onto this and relieved some people because they didn't want a war with Iran, which is very sound. So I have to tell you, the same people that helped Dick Cheney put a missile into the Pentagon are still there. So there's every possibility that there are rogue elements of the U.S. government that are disloyal to the president, to the Constitution, to the Republic. We don't know. One of the problems is we have a very mediocre counterintelligence community, and the National Security Agency does not provide signals intelligence support to either clandestine operations overseas, which was my problem with them, or counterintelligence here at home. The one thing we have going for us now is that I and Benny and a few others have helped the Trump administration understand that Mike Hayden's doing warrantless wiretapping on everybody has a silver lining. Trump now has every name of every traitor, every elite pedophile, every elite white-collar criminal, names, dates, places, cash amounts from the 99% of the NSA databases that was previously unprocessed that has now been surgically exploited. So we're in a very, I think the deep state is on the run. And my frustration with Trump is he's not pivoting to connect with the 99% and build a power base that can bury the two-party tyranny. Now we look at Chuck Schumer. Chuck Schumer is Israel's highest paid agent in the United States of America. Chuck Schumer works for Israel. He is in no way, shape, or form a representative of New York State, and I'm a New Yorker. I was a New Yorker, now I'm a Virginia, but I'm a son of New York. Chuck Schumer, in my view, has made it very clear many times that his job in the Senate is to protect and defend the interests of Israel, not America first.
So the one part that always bugs me with this, over the last few days with these stories is, so why cover this up, right? So if this was a false flag or a real missile or something that they were able to stop, whether deep state or otherwise, I don't see why they wouldn't come out and say, look, we stopped this, right? Expose the deep state or
let's
show
go
that.
Let's go back to the USS Liberty. Why did we cover up the USS Liberty? Because Lyndon Baines Johnson was a wholly owned whore for the Zionist Republic of Israel. All right. Now, if an Israeli missile or if an Israeli submarine fired a missile on the United States of America, even though Trump might be inclined to say this was what happened, I suspect Trump is not getting the truth from his own government. I think Trump had better sources of information when he was campaigning than he has now. General Tony Zinni is on record as saying that the secret intelligence community only provided him with 4% of what he needed to know when he was commanding 2 wars and 12 joint task force actions. I personally think President Trump is being lied to a lot. I think a lot of information is being held back from him. And I think the U.S. government is incompetent at what I have led for the last 40 years, the new discipline of open source intelligence, which is decision support. We don't do holistic analytics. We don't do true cost economics. We don't do counterintelligence. You know, this is all this massive, massive fraud being perpetrated on the U.S. Public. So if Israel fired the missile, there are a lot of reasons going back to the USS Liberty for the U.S. government to cover that up. If a rogue element of the U.S. government, let's say a Navy submarine where they have carefully arranged to have Pentecostalists and anti-Ashkenazi Jews in the command positions, and let's say they fired the missile, that is a massive act of treason that James Mattis probably doesn't want anyone to know about. My bottom line, I don't know. I want to know. I don't believe I'm being told the truth, and there's no one in the U.S. government right now capable of getting at the truth.
Very interesting. It's kind of the same line of thought I was going towards, and we can discuss in a minute the other false flag discussion, which was the drone attack on Russian air bases, which I find very interesting. It kind of lines up there with the idea that my theory that other people's theories that I've reported on is that essentially it's possible that it was a CIA attack, and that's the point, is that ultimately it's possible that it was a unilateral effort and that Trump and his administration has no idea about it. But you could also argue that that's kind of plausible deniability. So maybe that's kind of the storyline there.
Well, let me reinforce your line of thinking. An excellent book on CIA by David Talbot is The Devil's Chessboard. And it talks about Allen Dulles and how after Allen Dulles was fired, he still controlled the CIA. And he was the primary person who put together the assassination plot against Kennedy with a number of others, including Lyndon Baines Johnson. And I had dinner with Roger Stone. I'm a real fan of Roger Stone. And Roger was telling me about his own book on the Kennedy assassination. And the huge insight that Roger gave me the other night was that there were 7 or 8 different actors, including Israel, in the assassination of John F. Kennedy. None of them trusted the others, so they all provided their own shooter. Okay, so Kennedy was actually shot by multiple shooters, the Corsicans from the CIA, this guy named Winston from LBJ, the Zionists had their shooter. You know, it's absolutely fascinating. The same kind of truth that took 25 years to come out from JFK is going to come out from 9/11. That was a Zionist planned attack that Dick Cheney executed. Dick Cheney, whore of Zion, okay? And that had the complicity of Air Force elements that arranged for a missile to hit the Pentagon, a U.S.-owned and fired missile. So there's a lot going on here. And my happiness, if you will, is that Trump plus Pizzagate have opened the public's eyes. And I think we've moved from 2% awake to 25% awake right now. And we're going to go toward 50% awake, left or right, Sandinista, Tea Party, independents. Stuff is happening here. The American public is waking up. And I have said that hashtag on Rig Now has changed its thrust to 2018 being the year of the independent. I would like 435 congressional districts to all agree among the Libertarians, Greens, and Independents that they will all support one candidate in each congressional district. So envision 50 Green candidates, 50 districts allocated to Greens, 50 districts allocated to Libertarians, 50 districts allocated to Independents, and we all come together to make sure that we have 150 members of Congress that are not from either the Democratic or Republican wings of the two-party tyranny.
Well, shoot, that would be nice and get kind of supersede the entire paradigm, right?
But it would, and the problem is I can't get the Libertarian leadership to get its head out of its ass. These people are wholly owned by the Koch brothers, which, by the way, is the correct pronunciation. The Libertarian leadership does not actually want to win an election.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's the problem, and I would worry that even if these other side parties are not just as corrupt at this point. That's I'm kind of trying to get past.
All parties are toxic. The one thing Cynthia McKinney and I agreed on before she went back to Bangladesh is that we should be focusing on people, not parties. When I ran for the Reform Party nomination for the presidency, and later when I considered running for the Libertarian Party nomination against Gary Johnson, what's in Aleppo, Gary Johnson, bad things about them, no matter how small they are. Number one, they insist that it be a one-party ticket and a one-party cabinet, which is insane. Number two, they insist that you embrace the party platform, many elements of which are often clinically insane. And number three, they insist that you honor promises made by the party to high-dollar donors, which are often extraordinarily corrupt. Look at the Libertarian Party and the Koch brothers, okay? So all parties, no matter how small, are corrupt. The next president needs to be an independent president with a coalition cabinet, a balanced budget, announced in advance, who challenges the other candidates to do the same thing. So you have debates between the attorney generals, debates between the secretaries of state, debates. I would abolish the Department of Homeland Security, but debates between the nominees for the Department of Homeland Security. The public needs to move toward electing a team and a philosophy, not a man who then appoints their billionaire buddies and lets everybody just run amok.
Yeah, I would completely agree with that. And that's one of the reasons I feel that I have some doubts behind Trump after seeing the people they brought in. But one last question I have about the missile, before we can get on to some other topics, is you touched on it, but which is the Japanese false alert that we also had, which is ridiculous in my opinion. I mean, that just continues to compound the absurdity after you see another one right afterwards. So how does that play into it? Do you think that was meant to cover it up?
I don't know, but I'm reminded of Fukushima, where there is also a strong suspicion that the Israelis had a role in the Fukushima disaster. And one of the problems is that we don't do holistic analytics, okay? The way in which governments approach information is very stovepiped. No one connects all of the dots. For example, if I were running a counterintelligence agency, I would start with the bloodlines. I would know the bloodlines of every single person related to the Rothschilds and the Jesuits going back 200 years. I would have records of everything the Chinese have ever said about the Spratly Islands going back 200 years. Nobody does holistic analytics. Everything is treated in isolation, and all political discussions, including everything on Crap News Network, are treated as of the moment. There's no historical context. There's no philosophical context. There's no effort to connect the dots. So we can't really understand what went on in Japan. It might have been another missile. It might have been a false attack that was intended to cover up a genuine false alarm in Japan would lead some people to believe that the false alarm in Hawaii was actually a false alarm. I don't think it was, because the guy that's been in the center tells me 2 keys, 8 feet apart. This was not an accident. Okay, there's no button. And you know, if I were president, I would have gotten on a plane and said, "Show me the goddamn button." Okay, nobody's doing that. Nobody's willing to say, "Show me the button."
Yeah, no, that's exactly kind of what I was thinking. It seemed like an easy way to say, well, see, it happened here, so it's a normal thing. So I definitely agree with that. And I appreciate you getting into the backstory here. I know that you probably can't elaborate on your sources, but that would be very interesting.
Look, my sources are normal people sources. It's not like I'm running a spy network. I'm the guru for open source, for crying out loud. I mean, they don't want their names used because they're afraid of retribution and mockery and so forth. But bottom line here is the phi-beta-iota.net is a gold standard for telling the truth. In fact, the Zionists have successfully gotten my website labeled a pornographic website. And the way this works is Zionist trolls report that it's a pornographic website to Kaspersky and Norton. None of these people have ethics, and so they accept that at face value. So there's a real effort to bury phi-beta-iota.net, and I've written an article about this. If anyone's interested, tinyurl.com/Google Gestapo. And it describes the 6 ways in 90 days that the Zionists tried to destroy the hashtag on rig campaign. And to that, I would add Amazon. Amazon has completely lost its integrity in the reviews process to the point that I just insisted they remove all 2,500 of my reviews. I will no longer post reviews on Amazon because they are banning books and they are banning reviews by anyone who used the word Zionist in a review.
Yeah, that's a very interesting article. I think we actually posted that on the website. But speaking of Israel and how it relates to the greater idea here, going back to the drone false flag attack that happened on the Russian bases. That's my theory in that is essentially that Israel was directly tied to it, or just Western powers in general, because one story that drives me crazy is the lack of any coverage of the fact that Israel is openly bombing Syria for no other reason that they're trying to create a war with them. And there's no premise of ISIS.
Look, there's oil underneath the Golan Heights, and Israel has been stealing water from the Jordanian aquifer for over a decade. In fact, I've just accepted in principle an invitation to speak in Iran in March on the historical context and so forth. And just for those of you that wonder about a loyal American citizen visiting Iran, let me tell you, I'm going to send the Washington field office of the FBI an email saying, here's when I'm leaving, here's when I'm coming back. I'd be glad to take a polygraph exam and be debriefed upon my return. Okay? You know, all of these morons that say, oh my God, you're going to Iran, you're an Iranian sympathizer, screw you. It's time that we deal with reality and deal with the truth. And what the Israelis have been doing, genociding the Palestinians, manipulating U.S. foreign policy, bribing U.S. officials, in fact, blackmailing U.S. officials. People need to understand that Jeffrey Epstein and all of this pedophilia blackmail is the official state policy of Israel to basically subordinate the American government to the whims of Zionist war criminal Netanyahu. The other thing people don't realize is that the Israelis are really good at faking out the U.S. government. They have what we call talking rocks. And if you go to Phi Beta Iota and look up talking rocks, you'll get to it. The Israelis were able to fabricate Libyan support for terrorism by putting talking rocks into Gaddafi's compound, which then were signal emitters that were faking all of these messages back and forth between Gaddafi and terrorism, which weren't real. Okay. More recently, the Israelis had talking rocks, which purported to be Syrian army officers saying, "Send me more sarin gas." I mean, how stupid do you have to be to believe that? Well, NSA believes it, okay, and reports it. Oh my God, the Syrian army is asking for more sarin gas. Come on.
Believes it or are simply complicit. I mean, we're talking about all these different nuances to these larger stories. I mean, the drone false flag we're talking about in Syria, I'm sorry, in Russian bases in Syria, but now we're also seeing the United States effort on the Turkish Russian Syrian border to kind of create that from happening. I mean, clearly we're seeing a lot of manipulation on the world scale here. And I would say that all these intelligence agencies to some degree are aware of what's going on. I mean, I think
they're out of control. No, they're not as aware as they could be and should be. Okay, you cannot overstate how stupid CIA is. Part of the problem is that 90% of the people at CIA are good people trapped in a bad system, and it's that 10% of rogue elements that's really out of control. I mean, I've written very publicly regarded academic book reviews against CIA drone assassination, which kills 98% innocents, and we wonder where terrorists come from, and against CIA torture. I was one of the first CIA officers responsible for chasing terrorists full time in the 1980s. Torture does not work. Torture produces false leads, okay? You have to be a sadomasochistic asshole like Dick Cheney to say torture works, okay? George Tenet, I mean, he's a staffer who could never empty his inbox. The fact is, torture doesn't work, and anybody who's actually been involved in all this stuff knows that. Now, what's happening in the Middle East, I think, is not only are a number of Pentagon elements and U.S. secret intelligence elements out of control and disobeying the president. You have to remember that Harry Truman, when president, said, "We will not bring Nazis into the United States." And in fact, we enabled Hitler to move to Argentina. We saved all of the Nazi officials, all of their treasure, and we made CIA and the National Aeronautics and Space Agencies the top secret hubs for Nazi control of the US government. Okay? The Nazis did not lose World War II. They took over the United States government. Now, this is stuff that people just don't understand. So I think the Israelis are wreaking a lot of havoc. I think there's a lot of stuff going on to try and destabilize and balkanize the Middle East. I would really like to see Russia, Iran, and China, as well as Egypt and Turkey, have a serious discussion about what's the future of the Middle East. I'd like to see the Israelis jammed back into a very small box. I will tell you right now, if I were president, there would not be a single taxpayer dollar spent on the Middle East. No money for foreign dictators, including Saudi Arabia. No money for the Israeli military. I would make every Zionist organization in the United States required to register as an agent of a foreign power, and I would terminate all tax deductions for all nonprofits, not only Zionist nonprofits. The amount of money laundering that is going on in the United States is beyond belief.
Yeah, one of the issues that I always point out, that whether he was manipulated into this or not, that Trump essentially allowed the unilateral actions of his generals on the field. And we've seen that. We saw that in Afghanistan with the Moab and, things that they claim that they were behind, but I would argue that he probably had no idea it was even happening and tried to come around behind it. But, the question is whether it was manipulated into or not. But that's part of the big.
Trump's instincts are good. I mean, on the campaign trail, and we've published, Paul Adams, anyone that goes to Phi Beta Iota can look up Trump report card, and they'll see that he's failing on 2/3 of the fronts. On the campaign trail, his instincts were good. Throw the UN out of New York, get out of NATO, end U.S. involvement in elective foreign wars, end U.S. support for dictators. All of Trump's instincts were good on the campaign trail. I also believe he had better sources of information on the campaign trail than he does now. Right now, Donald Trump is being isolated from reality. He does not understand how easily he could become the greatest president just by leaving the White House and getting back on the road.
Very interesting. And again, that's always something that I hope for. And I can see the logic in that because it clearly seems like he tends to be aligned with the right things, but then the actions that followed aren't what people would expect. And then they kind of get justified by the followers. So I truly hope that is the case.
I think the truth teller is going to be the arrests in February. Um, Everything that I'm reading and seeing is suggesting that there are close to 10,000 indictments. There are going to be some arrests. Guantanamo has been refurbished and is ready for some major elite criminals. And all the others are on notice. If you're a traitor or an elite pedophile who murders children for fun, or a Goldman Sachs trader who has been manipulating currency and exchange rates to basically screw the US public, you're on notice. We've got it all. We can take you down anytime we want. And, or even worse, we won't indict you. We'll just release the information to the public and watch them burn down your mansion.
So let's jump into the recent event of the FISA memo that's floating around, because that seems clearly tied to that. But I have a lot of skepticism with that, because first of all, I don't like going on the word of politicians at this point. That's basically what we have at the moment. So
no, we have to
what's
see,
your thoughts on that?
See the FISA memo. But I am absolutely persuaded that the Clinton era, as well as the Bush era, created you have to understand that the deep state starts with the Rothschilds and the Vatican and all of these guys, and then moves down through the banking world and the Freemasons and the Knights of Malta, and then the two political parties, and then the secret intelligence agencies. There is absolutely no question but that the FBI and the Department of Justice are riddled with traitors, as is the Department of State and the Department of Defense. We have never taken counterintelligence seriously in this country. I think the FISA memo is, when it eventually comes out, going to compellingly demonstrate that the FBI and the Department of Justice had key people who violated every possible concept of the Constitution, laws, and regulations. But it gets better. There's another memo floating around which purports to be, I have no direct knowledge, it purports to be a GCHQ memo stating that they were bugging the Trump Towers on behalf of NSA and asking for a 90-day renewal of permission to do so. Now, I happen to know from personal experience, I've taken all the NSA management courses. I am the top Amazon reviewer and have read Jim Bamford's books and all of this stuff. For a long time, before we went to indiscriminately universal capture of everybody's emails and phone calls under Mike Hayden. Mike Hayden, by the way, is the only guy I know who has been a traitor twice over. As the director of NSA, he did warrantless wiretapping, and as the director of CIA, he authorized rendition and torture. Okay, this guy should not be allowed to appear in public, and he certainly should not be allowed to appear on Crap News Network or Fox or anywhere else. This guy should be in isolation and thanking the gods that he's still alive. There was a deal in the past where the CIA would spy on the Canadians would spy on the Brits, and the Brits would spy on the Americans, the politicians. And then they would hand it over. And that would allow the leaders of those three communities to tell their politicians that they were absolutely not spying on them, but they were getting the take from a third party. So Five Eyes is like a little incestuous round table where you rotate the responsibility. There's no question but that Trump was spied on, and this whole unmasking thing is the larger crime. Susan Rice should be going to jail. Susan Rice led the absolute violation of every possible protection in seeking to unmask all of these names. There's no question but that Susan Rice and Barack Obama are indictable today.
And I absolutely hope so. I mean, I continue to hope that these things happen, but I have strong doubts about whether these people will truly be held accountable, or we'll just see some underlings kind of wrapped up in this like we have in the past.
Well, you know, I'm huge on truth and reconciliation. And my version of truth and reconciliation is the public gets the truth, no one goes to jail. And I consistently say it's more important for all of the people to be educated than to send a few of the people to Guantanamo. Okay. Um, what is happening right now with Donald Trump and Chuck Schumer's closure of Congress and Pizzagate, and I'm a commissioner on, in fact, you can be the first to see it. I'm a commissioner for an international tribunal, which is treaty mandated into human trafficking and child sex exploitation. And I am nurturing a book by a West Point graduate, Joaquim Hagopian, on pedophilia and empire, Satan, sodomy, and the deep state. We are looking deeply into what everybody else has refused to touch, which is the jump from pedophilia to satanic ritual murder. And the fact that our going in assumption, we haven't documented it yet, 8 million children a year are disappearing from around the world. 8 million, that's 22,000 a day. And their average life expectancy once they get into the system is 2 years. That's the nut that we're going after, okay? It's going to take us 2 or 3 years. It's very possible some of us will be killed along the way. It's a righteous activity. I'm telling everybody that we need to follow a truth and reconciliation path, in part to keep ourselves alive. But the bottom line is the era of secrecy is over. You know, with a shout out to Jim Mars and Michael Rupert, they can no longer rule by secrecy. It's over. It's done with.
Well, thank you for sharing that first with us. That's very interesting. I definitely understand your apprehension and the idea that, because we know that this kind of thing is, well, you know what I mean, about actually bringing these people in, because this is deeply seated in the government. That's one point I wanted to make, that
it's not just the government. It's all universities, it's all religions. We're now starting to get people coming forward from Jehovah's Witnesses, from the Mormons. I mean, you know, my dream is Mitt Romney, Mike Pence, and Joe Biden as candidates for president 2020. Talk about 3 naked guys being really, really ripped apart. They won't survive it because this is the 2020 election is going to be a no holds barred election in which every single one of the candidates is going to be held accountable for anything they've done to cover up or participate in pedophilia. And every one of the governors of the United States of America is complicit in covering up pedophilia. All right. The Franklin scandal in Nebraska, that's replicated in every single state in the United States of America. There isn't a governor that has clean hands in the United States of America.
It's really so great to see this begin to come out. There's so many of us that have been fighting for this for so long and have been trying to raise awareness to this even before the Franklin scandal. But that was kind of one of those moments that really started to draw attention of the alt media, if it existed back then.
And then Spotlight, the movie, that was very helpful too. But it wasn't until Pizzagate, which was caused by a Romanian taxi driver and John Podesta being stupid. It wasn't until Pizzagate that the larger public started to realize, hey, wait a minute, this is much, much bigger than we realized, to include underground tunnels, restaurants where you can order children on the menu. You know, this is beyond most people's comprehension, but now they're at a point where they're saying, oh, wait a minute, maybe there's something to this.
Right. And but that's the thing for me. And I think that many people would agree. And I do understand your logic of the truth and reconciliation, but the people like John Podesta and the Clintons that, you know, even going back to not the entire thing, but say like the Silsby Clinton connection there. And the one incident that we have proof of, like actually bringing children from Haiti, I want to see people held accountable for those things. I do get your logic, but there's
I think that's going to happen. Look, one of the things you do have to do is isolate these people from society. You can no longer allow them to go to the supermarket or whatever. I mean, I just got an email today from a guy with a NASA background saying, hey, I've got a moon on Saturn where we can port these people. And I don't know the truth of our secret space program. That's a topic I tend to avoid because I'm not directly expert in that area. But it would be quite fascinating to me. You know, the British used to export their convicts to Australia, and the Swedes exported their convicts to Finland. There's no reason why we can't contemplate exporting every pedophile to one of the moons of Saturn and everybody who's murdered a child to another of the moons of Saturn and let them eat themselves. You know, there's obviously many alternatives for divine justice. Bottom line is we first have to get to the bottom of this. We really need to have every American understand that there is a pedophile every block. There's a kill room every 10 blocks. There are 8 million children that are being both kidnapped and killed. You know, 8 years, 8 million, then 2 years later, they've died. This is the greatest genocide in the history of humanity. And it's also one that's been going on for hundreds of years. This is not new. This is something that has been part of human society. Child sacrifices go back to the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Indians and not our Indians, but the India Indians. And so there's these large cosmic forces that have not been understood, not been defined. And I really believe we're at the very beginning of enlightenment here as a public. We're at the very beginning. And I'd like to do my part to create a world brain on the one hand and to get to the bottom of pedophilia and elite satanic child murder rituals on the other. By the way, we have 2 more books after Pedophilia and Empire. One will be 1,000 child survivors and 100 prisoners, just talking about the specifics. And then the third one will be the counterintelligence volume that nails the elites that gather once a year, including the Pope, to celebrate their satanic child murder practices.
I mean, I really, truly hope that this does come to pass, because I think that a lot of people have put so much effort into exposing this. So I think that's really,
it's a 5-year project. Whoever is elected president in 2020 could, with Putin and Xi, bring this to fruition. I'm not sure Trump is going to go the distance. I want him to go the distance. I mean, my tinyurl.com/Trump triumph is the dummy's guide to being the greatest president ever, but I can't get him to act on it.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I mean, hope and reality are often two different things. So I definitely hope it does as well, but I honestly don't see it happening this time. But the last question I have for you, and something that I wanted to ask you ultimately, because one of the criticisms you received from my interviews last time is the justifiable so, but the anger at people that might call you out or question you. And so now,
I'm not angry at all. I just file federal lawsuits against people who defame me. That's not a problem. That's not anger. That's retribution.
Right. But my question would be that, so for those out there that like we said in the last time, like the fact that you once worked for the CIA or, any of these things, that people out there that would question or ask, why should we trust what you're saying? Why would it be genuine? What would you say to those people? And, at a real genuine answer.
This is real simple. Learn to fucking read. Okay. RobertDavidSteele.com has 8 books, hundreds of articles and chapters, presidential and congressional testimony. If you can't get your head out of your ass and go read and see what I've actually said for 40 years, the reason I'm unemployed, the reason I've been marginalized for the last 10 years is because CIA and NSA understand that if my ideas are successful, they will lose 70% of their budget. What part of that do you not understand?
So, well, thank you, Robert. I really appreciate you joining me today. And I think that we covered some really interesting information. And I think that some hopeful information, ultimately, stuff that I think will give some people hope.
I really am.
Yeah, me as well. And I really would like to see this come to pass. So maybe we can touch base again in a couple months and see where we're at. So thanks for joining me, Robert. And everyone out there, stay vigilant.
Live long and prosper. Bye-bye.
Take out